So we've all been told this story, right? That capitalism and democracy are basically two sides of the same coin. The perfect team. But what if that story's wrong? What if they're actually locked in a hidden conflict? Today, we're going to use slides to dig into that very idea. Let's just dive right in with a number that is, well, it's pretty hard to wrap your head around. This is from the World Inequality Report. If you take all the wealth on the planet, the richest 10% of people own 75% of it. Now get this, the entire bottom half of the world's population, they own just 2%. That's a staggering imbalance we're talking about here.
And that immediately brings up a huge critical question, and it's really the whole point of this explainer. How can a system built on the idea of political equality for everyone, how can that possibly survive next to an economic system that creates this kind of massive inequality?
To even begin to answer that, we've got to tackle a really common belief, this idea that capitalism and democracy are some kind of perfect match made in heaven.
You hear it all the time, that these two systems just naturally go together, that they reinforce each other. But the source material we're looking at really pushes back on that. I mean, if they were truly a package deal, how do you explain places like the UAE, where you see enormous capitalist wealth being built up in a system that's, not exactly democratic?
The thing is, the partnership isn't a total myth. It's just temporary. For a while, the two systems can actually work together beautifully, creating what our source calls a honeymoon phase.
And in the beginning, you can see this incredible synergy. Democracy brings the political freedom, and capitalism just unleashes these colossal productive forces. That combo creates a growing middle class, and what does a middle class want? More stuff and more rights. So both systems get stronger. For a time, it really does feel like a win-win.
But, and you knew there was a but coming, this honeymoon period doesn't last forever. Eventually, the very nature of these two systems puts them on an inevitable collision course.
And here's the absolute heart of the conflict, baked right into their DNA. Democracy is fundamentally about political equality. But capitalism, it doesn't just happen to create economic inequality, it requires it to work.
Just think about where power comes from in each system. In a democracy, it's simple. One person, one vote. That's your power. But in capitalism, power comes from capital. The more money you have, the more money you can make. And that just naturally concentrates power into the hands of a smaller and smaller group of people.
So the big question is, how does all that money, that economic power, actually turn into political power? Well, our source material lays out a pretty clear three-step process for how this happens.
It all starts with something the economist Thomas Piketty famously pointed out. He showed that this ever-widening inequality isn't some accidental glitch in the system. Nope, it's a fundamental feature.
Piketty's idea is simple but so powerful. Basically, the rate of return you get on capital, that's money from investments, property, stocks, all that stuff, it consistently grows faster than the return on labor, which is, your salary from your job. Over time, that gap just inevitably makes the wealth divide wider and wider.
Okay, so this growing pile of economic capital, it doesn't just sit there. It starts to transform. First, it gets you social capital. Access to exclusive networks, fancy clubs, influential people. And then that social capital gets converted into direct political capital. The ability to fund campaigns, hire armies of lobbyists, and basically write the rules in your own favor.
And let's be clear, this is not just some theory. We see it playing out in the real world all the time. Think about a massive, star-studded event like the Ambani wedding in India. That's not just a party, it's social capital being built in real time. Or just look at the kind of access and direct influence someone like Elon Musk has with the highest levels of government. That's political capital. Which of course leads to the obvious question you're probably thinking right now. If we live in a democracy and people see this happening, why don't they just vote to change things?
Well, the answer has a lot to do with who gets to tell the story. When people are struggling, they naturally look for someone to blame. The problem is that the stories they're given often come from a media landscape that's largely owned by the very corporations and billionaires who benefit from the way things are.
And two main narratives tend to pop up. On one side, you have a story that celebrates capitalism, frames billionaires as heroes, and subtly pushes this pull yourself up by your bootstraps idea, which implies that if you're poor, it's kind of your own fault. On the other side, you have a narrative that weaponizes fear and resentment. It creates scapegoats, blaming immigrants or minorities for everyone's problems. Notice what both stories do. They brilliantly redirect anger away from the system itself. And the result of all this misdirection? A devastating crisis of faith. A recent poll of the US found that among the most financially insecure people, only 52% still believe democracy is the best form of government.
And that's the real tragedy here. The very people who need democratic protections the most are the ones who are losing faith in it the fastest.
So where does all this leave us? After looking at all this, what's the bottom line? Can democracy actually withstand this kind of pressure?
Well, the key takeaway from the source material is this. We have to stop thinking of this as a partnership. It's not. It's an antagonism. Capital, by its very nature, is always looking to break free from any and all restraints that democracy tries to put on it.
So for democracy to survive, it can't just be passive. It has to actively build up its defenses, what the source calls bulwarks. That means things like a social contract designed to curb extreme wealth, making sure things like education and healthcare stay public so everyone has a fair shot, and this is a big one, giving all citizens a critical political education so they can see past these distracting narratives.
And that leaves us with one final, pretty provocative thought. Maybe we've been asking the wrong question all along. Maybe it's not about whether capitalism and democracy can be friends. Maybe, for democracy to survive, it actually has to tame capitalism. And that's a thought that really challenges a core assumption about the world we live in.